We're almost through this year's 13 Nights of Halloween, but it feels like we've only just begun. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. As part of my 2020 13 Nights of Halloween series, today I'm going to be talking about the 2007 psychological horror film 1408. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. 1408 stars John Cusack, Samuel L. Jackson, and Mary McCormack, and was directed by Mikael Håfström. Based on Stephen King's 1999 short story of the same name, it tells the story of paranormal travel writer Mike Enslin, played by John Cusack, as he stays overnight in the supposedly haunted room 1408 of a New York City hotel. It's really challenging to adapt a book into a movie. I've talked about this in past Stephen King reviews, and despite the fact that I love his writing, I don't always love the film adaptations of his novels. Some certainly do a good job, but I find that many of them fail to capture the core of the story. King's books are pretty layered. He's best known for the horror in his stories, but there are usually quite a few deeper themes and complex characters that enhance that horror and really make it work. That's awesome in a 500 plus page book, but really difficult to convey in a 2-hour movie. Luckily, King's written many short stories and novellas that don't typically have quite as much complexity to them, making them a bit easier to adapt to the screen in a satisfying way, and 1408 is one of those cases. Like many of Stephen King's stories, 1408 focuses on a writer. Specifically, it focuses on a writer's supernatural descent into madness in a hotel. That might sound a tad bit familiar, but this movie takes a unique approach to the story. I've always loved the premise of 1408. We have an author who's essentially a paranormal travel writer staying overnight in supposedly haunted hotels and writing about his experiences. This movie came out when I was in high school, and around the same time, a friend of mine and I were really into paranormal investigation. We used to go out to haunted places and cemeteries and all sorts of spots with cameras and microphones and EMF meters and the whole deal. So this movie was right up my alley when it came out. But this isn't really a ghost hunting film. It's a supernatural haunted house drama. And one of the things that separates this from other sort of similar stories is the character of Mike Enslin. Yes, he's a writer who stays at haunted locations, but he's also a skeptic. In all of his travels, he's never seen a ghost or experienced anything truly supernatural. So he approaches his overnight stays as purely a job. No real excitement, plenty of sarcasm, and a hint of cynicism. And this makes the casting of John Cusack so perfect. He's really able to put off that air of bored, sarcastic skepticism. But he has the range within that type of character to cover the whole spectrum of emotions this character goes through during this story, as well as the tonal shifts that occur over the course of the movie. This story probably still would have been pretty creepy if our main character had been some random, unsuspecting hotel guest, but having it be a skeptic willingly and knowingly staying in room 1408 makes it that much more effective, because we're with somebody who doesn't rattle easily. He initially approaches things from a very analytical perspective, which plays right into the tension building of the story. The strange things happening in 1408 start off pretty small. A broken thermostat, mysteriously appearing chocolates, a suddenly crooked picture frame, and each time something happens, Mike approaches it logically to come up with a rational explanation. But it doesn't take long for us to see that those rational explanations get debunked, which starts to put both us and Mike on edge. That unsettling tension only continues to build as the story progresses. More and more inexplicable things happen in that room, and we actually get some spooky and anxiety-inducing sequences. Things also take a fairly dark turn. The sarcasm and lightness that we initially see in Mike is quickly doused, and the tone of the movie follows suit. In the midst of the creepy haunted house horror, it also becomes a very downbeat and emotionally heavy story, as Mike's forced to confront painful events from his past. There are some really eerie and chilling moments regarding that dredging of the past, which work to make this a more darkly haunting story than you might anticipate. The actual short story isn't overly complex, and so the movie really fleshes things out, which is both good and bad. The whole backstory for Mike introduces a more emotional and human element to the story, but it also forces some of the focus away from the room itself, which muddles things a bit. The same thing happens regarding what's actually going on in room 1408. Is it something truly supernatural? Is Mike going crazy? Was he drugged? Is it all an elaborate ruse by the hotel staff? All these possibilities are explored at one point or another, and while it's interesting to think about all the possibilities and the mystery of it all, it does get a little frustrating never getting a clear answer or direction. The film tries to balance the supernatural scares with the psychological ones, and while it's still a very entertaining movie, I do think it would have been more effective had they definitively chosen either the supernatural or the psychological route. This issue extends to the ending as well, or perhaps more accurately, endings. And this plural works in two contexts here. This is the type of story that's a bit misleading with its ending. It delivers some false endings, which do disrupt the pacing a little, making the third act feel a bit dragged out. But this multiple ending idea applies more literally as well. This film actually has 3 different endings. The theatrical ending, the director's cut ending, and then an alternate cut of the director's cut ending. Ironically, none of these 3 endings are how the short story ends. Now, each of these endings work. I personally prefer the theatrical ending, but I mostly mention this just because there's no real consistency as to which ending you're actually going to get. The Blu-ray automatically shows the director's cut. The DVD showed the theatrical version, and it's a total toss-up what version you're going to get if you go the digital route or stream it. So after watching it, I definitely recommend checking which ending you actually saw, and then seeking out the other 2 endings just to see them, because they do close the story on very different notes. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the premise. Now, I know the concept of an evil room might not sound all that interesting, but this movie does a great job making it compelling, because the person dealing with the evil room is a professional. Sorta. He does this for a living and purposefully stays in 1408, knowing all about its supposed supernatural qualities. This is unique for a haunted house type story. Typically, our main characters in these types of movies are unsuspecting victims. They don't know that they're in danger at the start, and so their reactions proceed accordingly as the horror ensues. The setup here is really different from that, and so it provides a really unique and interesting perspective on a story that could have been somewhat generic. The second pro is John Cusack. He's perfect for the role of Mike Enslin. This is a character who's a cynical, disillusioned writer with a dark past. He's very sarcastic and sort of meanly lighthearted at the beginning of the film. Despite writing about haunted locations, he's a skeptic who doesn't actually believe in ghosts. And Cusack's really good at portraying that sort of bored arrogance that initially defines the character. But as the horrific events unfold in 1408 and traumas of Mike's past are once again brought to light, Cusack has to deliver a much wider ranging performance than you'd initially expect, and I think he does a pretty good job with all of it. On the con side, my only real issue is the muddled third act. That's not to say I don't enjoy the third act and the end of the movie, it just feels a little sloppy at times. It tries a little too hard to psych us out, and even that element would have been fine if it had committed to either a supernatural approach or a psychological one. Instead, the movie's this balancing act between the two, never really definitively telling us one way or the other until the very end, and so it kind of jumps back and forth between the two ideas in this third act, and they just feel a bit conflicting with each other at times. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying 1408 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give 1408 4 out of 5 paws. I've really enjoyed this one since I first saw it in the theater. It's got a sort of familiar premise, but takes it in a unique direction, with a fun character, lots of tension, and some entertainingly chilling moments. I would recommend 1408 to anybody interested in a haunted house story with a twist. Rather than dealing with a whole house, we're looking at a hotel room, but this movie manages to make the most out of that, delivering a creepy and compelling story. I think people who have read the short story will still enjoy this movie quite a bit. It changes some stuff up and adds a good deal regarding Mike's backstory, but it still does a pretty decent job of capturing the evil of 1408. And if you haven't read the short story, it's not a huge deal, because the film's pretty effective in its delivery. If you liked 1408, I would recommend The Shining. The surface level comparisons are pretty obvious here. A writer trapped in a hotel going mad as supernatural forces work to destroy him. But 1408 is far from being a rehash of The Shining. It offers a unique perspective on both the paranormal and psychological elements of the semi-familiar story. If you want another movie with an unexplained repeating event, you might want to check out Groundhog Day. That movie is more of a sci-fi romantic comedy, but features another sarcastic and cynical character trapped in a loop that begins with an alarm clock and a single song. And if you'd like another psychological John Cusack movie, you should definitely watch Identity. It's a very interesting and sometimes misleading story. Plus, it's set at a motel. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen 1408? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about a hotel? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.